Hello and welcome to another episode of In Conversation with by Kangaroo Minds. I am Vedika and today we have with us Havovi Bhagwag. Havovi is a psychologist as well as a psychotherapist who specializes in complex trauma and personality disorders. She runs her own private practice, Manashi, in Mumbai. In addition to that, she has also presented at several national and international conferences with regards to trauma intervention, and she has also trained students, healthcare workers, and medical practitioners in the space of trauma counseling. Our episode today with Havovi centers around talking about COVID and our mental health. But before we begin our conversation, we would like to put out a trigger warning for our audience. Anybody who is watching this today, in case you find any of the topics we discussed triggering or distressing, we urge you to please take a step back and take care of yourself. You may choose to talk to someone, practice some self-care, or if you're looking for resources, you can find a list on our website as well. And now, without taking much time, we're going to hear more from Havovi. So welcome to the episode, Havovi. It's absolutely lovely to have you with us. And we are looking forward to hearing more from you. I know it's been a year and a half in the pandemic. And, there are a lot of questions which come up around mental health, the implications that COVID is going to have on mental health, be it in the short term and the long term. But just to start off today, I'm just going to ask you that in terms of, your experiences, how have you seen COVID taking a toll on people's mental health, both in terms of, people who've had pre-existing conditions, as well as those which had no previous history or diagnosis?
So thank you for having me here, first of all, on this platform. I'm happy to be here and talk about mental health and COVID. This past year and a half has been a year of learning and unlearning and relearning for us in the mental health profession. A lot of things we didn't know ever existed, we are seeing now. So just to answer you from the point of view of the people who have had mental health issues in the past, they were, of course, caught unawares in the first wave, and there was a lot more difficulty that they faced in the first wave because of simple things like lack of prescriptions.
Right.
If they ran out of psychiatric medication, the medical shops wouldn't provide it, so then the government had to put in directives that allowed them to take medication with just a soft copy of the prescription. So the first month or two, I had patients who were finding it very difficult to procure medication. So it's basic, right? And since I work in the field of trauma, people with families that have perpetrators living with them, those people having to live in that enclosed environment during the lockdown. And you can remember the first lockdown, how very strict it was. So that was very difficult. People with anxiety disorders, especially obsessive compulsive traits or obsessive compulsive disorders, found it very difficult to follow the norms because their latent anxieties became even more obvious during the pandemic, and they didn't know whether to follow the government directives or to follow what the health practitioners were telling them, and so on and so forth. Almost every single condition I saw on the spectrum of mental health disorders, everyone had issues. This time around, as 1.5 years have gone, people have got practices set in place. The government has been given a lot of support. Helplines have started. Mental health practitioners have really, stretched their boundaries to accommodate more people. So there's a lot more happening now. Mental health talks are available. Even people in rural areas are now able to access psychologists and counselors because of telehealth, which they didn't have access to earlier. So there are some positives as well. But overall, their mental health has suffered. In fact, there was a study done by NIMH which did a lot of predictions about how COVID would show up, let's say, across the year. So they did their predictions somewhere in 2020, middle of 2020, early 2020, March or so. And then they predicted what would happen if more waves of COVID came in. And the one thing that showed a steep incline was mental health problems worsening with each wave of COVID. And among the mental health conditions, grief showed a steep incline.
Right.
So which is exactly what happened. So predictions are based on, of course, models that have come in earlier. Earlier models showed the same thing. Earlier pandemics showed the same thing. That second wave onwards, it's a lot about trauma, and that's what has happened. The horror that people have gone through between April 2021 and now June 2021, it's just been nightmarish for families on the whole. The deaths that have happened, and the deaths that have happened are not the kind that we see regularly, and definitely not even the kind that happen in other illnesses.
Yeah.
They are deaths one that have happened not because of the virus. Most of the time they've happened because of lack of medical availability of medical care. That is very traumatic. It doesn't allow closure to happen. So it's been extremely stressful for people having to cope with the guilt and the feelings of anxiety that come with losing a family member in that state. And then not to mention what's happening to the frontliners, the stress they're going through, the burnout, the constant, just fatigue. So it's overall been a huge toll on mental health. And Vedika, let me say that the mental health situation in our country was nothing to laugh and sing about even before this
No,
crisis. We were
absolutely, absolutely.
we were in a mental health crisis even before this, right? In fact, the pandemic has zeroed in on the neglect we have in India over mental health or on mental health, and all the deep-rooted issues that were problems earlier, right? Lack of psychiatrists, lack of primary care centers. Forget a psychiatrist, lack of a primary care centers in areas that need it, which means there is no psychiatrist attached to those centers. The flooding of mental health, mental hospitals, the lack of availability of drug addiction and counseling centers in the city, the lack of availability of centers that focus on suicide prevention. All of the things that we require to keep a society healthy are missing. And so it's become even more drastic during this time.
I think, one thing that you mentioned, especially from an India context, is that, it's not that we were in some mental health utopia pre-COVID. But I think that has been something which a lot of countries, even developed countries, have realized that there's a massive care gap. Like it
Massive,
has
massive.
brought out, I mean, even though they have services, it's not enough to cater to the needs which people are having right now through the pandemic. But another group of, people that I would like to, have you throw some light on is the student population. So, be it students in school or colleges, they have not been, in many countries, including India, to school physically for at least the past year and a half. And while a lot of the conversation around this just focuses on, oh, you're missing out on learning or there's a loss of academic learning, I think we're kind of losing out the aspect of that social emotional learning and the mental health toll of not being in school or not being with your peers. So, can you throw a little bit of light on that aspect?
That's also a part of grief and grieving. I think we think of grief only in terms of death, but the fact that a student hasn't been able to attend a graduation ceremony. My son is in 10th grade or was in 10th grade, and he did his entire 10th grade online. So
Right.
he missed out on everything that comes with senior school, missed out on, all of the things that he never get back. That year of his life is never going to come back. And now all his friends have disbanded to different universities, schools, and they're not going to get that time to spend together the last year together. Of course, the general narrative is that, oh, these are small issues compared to bigger issues. They're not. They're not really, because we can't compare. For a student, these things are extremely important, correct? They often, because I work with a lot of teens and young adults, they often tell me that we don't talk about these issues to people in our family because really are they important, considering that our grandparents are ill, or considering that our family members have lost so many other relatives, or considering that there's a threat of this virus looming around. We don't like to talk to anyone about this, but the sadness is there, the grief is there. Yeah, I would say opening up conversations is important, not dismissing their feelings, as you said. So I'm glad you asked this question, because our youth are an extremely high risk group. We know
Right.
that, I know that, right? We know that in the global burden of diseases study, this age group, 15 to 24, is the age group in which the highest rates of suicide are. And After accidents or road accidents and drug abuse, suicides are the leading cause of death in this age group. So it's very important that we don't dismiss their feelings, and we don't think that their feelings are always around academics or always around routine.
Right.
So many parents that come to me think that the two markers for health in any child is if they're doing well in school and getting grades, and if they're maintaining a routine, waking on time, eating, sleeping on time, then it's fine. But the fact is, a student may be doing all of this and may be deeply distressed and disturbed, even so. So we have to have better markers. We have to have markers such as, is the child engaging? Is the child talking? Is he spending too much of time alone? Is the child happy? Is he satisfied? Does he seem to be showing a sense of joy in in any achievement? Is he also cribbing? And is he grumbling, which is very age appropriate,
Right.
right? And we all want to, I mean, that's the age at which we should grumble, between the ages of 15, 22. And so if that they're doing that, it's healthy, it's natural, because their brain is that type. It's grouchy, it's hormonal, it's irritable. So these are signs of health, actually. The sign that a child is engaged, is joyful, but is also cribbing, irritable, grumbling, doesn't want to do stuff, oppositional. So maybe other markers to identify, and a lot more effort to open up conversations around young adults and around teenagers. There's a paucity of that, I feel, in our country.
I think, one thing that you mentioned obviously was to look out for those markers, because a lot of times when you focus purely on academics or routine, you end up eliminating, that population who might be very high functioning. They're still struggling with their mental health, but they are high functioning and hence they just get completely overlooked. But you also made another point, which was around that concept of gratitude shaming, that, a lot of young people take
Yes.
it on themselves, but I don't have it as bad. But that's what we have grown up hearing, right? That other people have it worse than you. And a lot of young people have heard this, last year and through, especially when you had the migrant movement, that, look, you have what you need and it could be worse. And that's where they start to look at their problems as it doesn't matter. But it does, right? Because you're not talking about it, but for them it matters. How do you think we could, be a little more mindful as adults or people around, not just young people, but even others in general, so that we don't enforce that idea of gratitude shaming?
Very true. Gratitude, even the toxic positivity that's going around. Yeah, it's actually forced down the throat of this age group the most. You know, read this amazing book and it'll tell you all about life, or see this amazing movie and it'll change your perspective. But it doesn't work. If the child is depressed and they are a high risk group for depression, then all of this is literally water rolling off a duck's back. Has really, it doesn't penetrate into the mind. So I think it's important that first there is a change in the narrative, in the way in which we put forward things to the younger generation, and the expectations we have of them. There is also an expectation that we have of the youth being highly resilient. It's like a false resiliency. In fact, if you look at it, the second wave hit because we expected that the youth are never going to get ill. So we
Right.
pushed them back into the job market, forced them to resume life. They got burnt out, stressed out, and a lot of them engage in weekend partying and in night partying simply to get rid of that stress. It's a vicious cycle, if you ask me. And then a second wave hits. And it hits obviously this age group, which is vulnerable, which has mingled so much. That is why the virus has mutated with this group that has mingled more. And if you ask me, it's all because of the narrative being about them being strong, them being capable. More sensitivity about the way in which we are looking at our youth. They are not as strong and they can't literally take burden on their shoulders. There also has to be an understanding which is slowly emerging in India, which is around the neurobiology in the teen brain. So whenever I talk to parents about teenagers, I don't just give gyan. I talk to them about what's happening in the child's brain.
Right.
It does not have the capacity to mature until age 24, 23 to 25 is when myelination in the brain happens. That's when the brain, the neurons start developing the myelin sheath that allows sophisticated thinking and adult thinking to happen. So how do we expect a 17 or an 18-year-old to think like a 30-year-old? They can't. Even a 20-year-old cannot think like a 27-year-old. Every 6 months, their brain is going through massive changes. So learning about that neurobiology and having, again, a lot more discourses around that is important. And thirdly, I think what the NEP is trying to do, the new education policy, the new national education policy, which is trying to bring in an understanding of mental health at a very young age, teaching children about emotions in a manner. I don't know how much of that is really going to come onto the ground, but when I read the NEP, I was surprised to see that there is a lot more focus on mental health, at least on paper.
Right.
And I think that's what needs to happen in schools, in small ways at least, to get them to name their emotions, to get them to understand what's happening in their bodies, to get them to recognize the signs of anxiety and depression. That that little bit in schools, I mean, because even schools have counselors that focus only on learning disabilities and often are told to only look at kids who have problem areas like ADHD and LD, and all the rest are just ignored.
Right.
So having a more sensitive schooling system, a more sensitive educational system. Oh, there's lots that can be done. We can have an entire conversation
I think so.
on
Yeah.
this
I think we can talk, completely about how the
endlessly.
education system needs to, take into account student mental health per se. But another thing you touched upon a lot so far was the aspect of trauma and grief. And one thing that COVID has done is it's not discriminated anybody in that sense. Like each
So true.
person has felt it, whether directly you've been affected, indirectly, almost to the point where you can say that we're all going through this sort of a collective grief and a collective trauma experience. So how do you think we could better cope with that feeling? Because it's going to stay, for a while,
It's
it's
going.
going to stay.
So I've spoken about this earlier. Also, there was this. You know about the Jewish psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, and he said that an abnormal reaction in an abnormal situation is a normal reaction, is a healthy reaction. So the first thing is that nobody will feel absolutely okay in a global disaster. People are going to experience feelings and emotions they didn't think existed, even if they were fairly okay earlier. You don't feel close to sanity, and that is what more and more reports are showing. So it's a collective grief. It's shared by a whole group of people together. It's experienced. What someone experiences in Africa is very similar to what we're experiencing here. The fear is literally global. In a way, that's nice because we feel validated to some extent. Yeah, we feel like when we are reading a news report, it's talking about us. It's not talking about something happening in some pocket of the country that has no relation or connection to us. That said, the downside to this is that the availability of social support has decreased. See, if a family went through grief earlier, they could reach out to people who are not grieving and they got that social support. What I'm hearing instead from families is when people are reaching out to them for help, they're actually judging the kind of calls that family may have taken for the person, the deceased, in terms of COVID care, in terms of decisions around hospitalization, etc. Because the people who are calling them are in themselves anxious, right? They're actually calling them to figure out how did they cope with this problem rather than offering them the support that they need. So a lot of families are feeling isolated in that sense. Who do you reach out to when everyone is feeling similarly anxious? So you lose that social support in a lot of ways, especially when you are in the midst of a crisis. So I would think that let's talk about grief first. It's if you are going to grief singularly or as a family, then one of the things I would say is that reach out to social support that's healthy and learn to differentiate healthy and unhealthy social support. Some of the people that you may talk to may actually worsen the trauma. So temporarily move away from them. It's not
Right.
necessary that you cut relations, but try to give yourself that little bit of gap and try to be around people who will give you help. And in the COVID scenario, I think it's also very important for grievers and mourners to reach out not just for emotional help, but help with their daily routine. because that's what makes the family crumble finally. The lack
Right.
of availability of nutritious food, so no one to pay bills, the lack of availability of domestic help, the stigma, all of those things make you crumble and they erode the entire structure of the remaining members of the family. So, availability of that in their immediate community, that should be there. And if we talk about just the larger sphere outside of grief, all the other things that we are facing, I would say important for mental health is to see what's in our control and work with that. There's a lot not in our control which we are constantly harping about, whether it is about the vaccine availability, decisions that are taken at the higher level, about the way the virus is mutating. We can theorize, but we don't need to get emotionally connected to it, because that's where we realize our control slips out of our hands. The things that are in our control are definitely the support we reach out for, the amount of time we spend each day on our own mental health, the people we really connect with closely and have deep conversations with. So, things that keep us emotionally stable are important. And whether it was last year or this year, this I've been just saying the same thing, that if you survive each day is enough. There's no
Right.
need to be in competition with yourself or others. It's enough to just do as much as is okay. And it's all right to have days when you do nothing at all. So there are a lot of differences we may observe in ourselves between 2020, early 2020, 2019, and now. And that's just the way we have been shaped because of an uncertain environment. And it's okay to be that way.
And I'm sure, like, however, that, even as a psychologist, that human beings are not designed for that kind of uncertainty that suddenly we've been put through. We
Correct.
like to have some sort of routine or something to look forward to. And I think what is happening with the subsequent waves is that people are struggling to see that hope. I mean, we can all give people some sort of advice, like it will get better. But then how do you think people can sort of actually stay positive and hold on to that hope, that it's going to get better? And I'm not like toxic positivity is a whole different thing altogether,
Mm.
and we will come to that just in a while. But how do you stay hopeful during these times?
In order to stay hopeful, figure out what's going wrong currently and try to fix that. So, that's why I'm glad you used that word, toxic positivity. I think that toxic positivity is almost like denial. I'm just going to think positive, but not take any action about the problems I made today, and then I'm going to create a future for myself, which is a mess.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's a form of denial and avoidance, which becomes easy because when situations are so hopeless and there doesn't seem to be any kind of sun, the horizon that you can see, people start clinging on to anything and everything that gives them some kind of hope. Oh, this book, this quote, this whatever will help me feel better. But I'd say that you need to face your problems head on. If you have a family member who's ill, face it head on. If you know there's going to be a financial crunch in the next 6 months, plan for it today. So the way to be able to help anxiety is actually to take productive action in the present, not avoidance, productive action that just makes things better. Hope comes from a sense of optimism, and optimism doesn't come from just optimistic thinking, it comes from optimistic action. It means you're doing something today to take care of problems. So that is what I would say. Find out what are the things worrying you, what is the problem you have in your life today, and then see what how you can tackle it step by step, little at a time.
And now
If
coming
relationship
to,
is, yeah,
sorry, you were saying?
I think we got frozen for a bit.
Okay, now I was saying that, now coming to the entire concept around toxic positivity, we know that, recently there were a lot of, professionals who suggested that let's not look at, negative stories. Let's not look at the news around COVID. Don't put out the death toll. Don't put out case load. But let's all focus on only spreading positivity and sharing happy stories in the name of promoting better mental health. So what is, your take on that
Mm.
approach?
Anything in extreme is a problem, right?
Right.
On one end of the spectrum, we have doom scrolling, where people are constantly addicted to negative news, and they're literally using negative news as an upper, as a way to, take their emotions into a high. So on one end is that, and then the other hand is don't look at anything happening and just focus on reading positive, seeing positive. Now both these are two ends of the spectrum of anxiety. Okay, and neither of them are healthy. And I'll tell you why it is anxiety. The person who is constantly doom scrolling and is constantly reading through news articles, or is watching for every small sign of an
Right.
problem for the virus, is anxious, but they are using an approach called, um, they are approaching the anxiety by overdoing it. On the other hand, the people who go into this whole positivity place are also anxious, but they are avoiding the anxiety.
Right.
So it's just two faces of the same thing. And that is why they are neither healthy nor do they promote good health in the future. Instead, it's important to have something which is, in the middle of the spectrum. You can scroll through news articles, do it in a smaller quantity, and also develop a more optimistic view and a more rational view of things that you read. Check up whether the news stories that you read really are, put out by the media to grab attention, or
Right.
are they factual. So read factual articles. Don't avoid reading about the virus and how it is mutating, because you're caught unprepared then. And at the same time, don't avoid positive things at all. Watch light movies, read good stuff, pick up books that motivate you, but there's no need to overdo it either. So according to me, anybody who stays in a place of moderation can't really go wrong. It's when we decide to do too much of something, hoping that we will get a larger amount of that emotion, just, the opposite ends up happening.
Right. I think you've made some very interesting points on like taking care of ourselves during COVID, and how we need to do that. But can you tell us a little more on how we could better manage our own mental health as well as look out for others who we care about?
So the first thing is, I think, because um, the initiatives around mental health, I think where they lack is that they're not very clear about how to seek help. What are the signs you should look for to seek help? We see them also very superficially, even those I think which are released by the government. And so the first thing is, if you notice problematic signs in yourself or others, do reach out for help. A helpline is always available, and I'm sure it's on your website and so many other places. Um, so, what are those signs to look for? Definitely, if the person has been speaking about suicide, hasn't left the bed in days, has not attended work, or has been taking holidays from work. If the person has been eating or sleeping too much or too less, so in both directions, then continuous conflicts that the person may be having with others. Uh, at that, if you're seeing a number of these multiple signs in the same person, then don't wait to approach a good psychologist or a good psychiatrist. This is another big problem, right?
Hmm.
Everybody waits for a good, and waits for appointments of a psychiatrist that may give them an appointment 3 months later. People call me up, and I know my appointments are booked very, very tight till the end of this year. And I literally request people, don't wait, because mental health is not something you can delay. It's like physical health. You need to pay attention to it in the present. So call your nearest hospital, seek help of a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist that might be attached to that hospital. If you're lost and you don't know where to go, at least start
Start.
somewhere.
Correct.
That's the important thing. So don't delay seeking help, because a lot of our mental health issues just are because of neglect. People knew that they were going in for a problem, but they said, we'll be stronger, we'll wait for it to get better. Oh, this is because of the virus, blah, 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 blah. But if your condition, these signs that I spoke about, last for more than conversations, what's happening with video calls and chats is that we're losing the essence of a really intimate, proper conversation with somebody about our feelings. That is what is leading to a larger sense of isolation. So really focusing on having a chat with somebody about how we feel, rather than just what's happening around in the day and what we are going through. That is So deep conversations usually used to happen when friends met one another, went to each other's houses and sat down and spoke. It's very difficult to do that, I know, over video calls sometimes. However, make space for it, because a lot of the isolation we feel, loneliness we feel, is because we're feeling emotionally neglected. We don't feel validated internally. And then, of course, there's a third bunch of caring and self-caring activities you can do, such as mindfulness. 2 or 3 minutes of it on a daily basis is really beneficial. Taking care of your physical health, making sure you are doing something in the domain of intellectual and spiritual growth. So those simple things that help, yeah, in the
Right.
long run.
I think one thing that you mentioned right at the outset was, you kind of look out for help, be it a helpline or, reach out to a professional. It doesn't have to be like a good one just because, it worked for somebody else, it's going to work for you. But
Correct.
just for the benefit of, the audience today, can you tell us a little bit of, how to actually go about that process? Because even with helplines, like, so our website has curated, like a few which are like verified, but how do you know which is a good one to call, for instance? Because so many have mushroomed. You will have, cell phone numbers which are suddenly helplines, and we don't have any like legislation, etc., which really governs
Mm.
that space. So that's where like people at this time who are vulnerable can fall further prey to like a whole range of other issues. So if you could tell us a little bit about, how to authenticate and how do you go about picking, like a helpline or a professional, both.
So helplines that have been operating in the past and that have a robust, let's say, sourcing system of counselors, connecting counselors are operating more or less through the day, if possible, even overnight, are recommended. So that's one. Like there is the TIS iCall that has been
Right.
operating since a long time. Vandrewala Foundation has been operating way before the pandemic also. Samaritans as well. During the pandemic, the government, the NIMHANS and the government both have I think released 3 to 4 new helplines now, helpline numbers. So those also are verified because the volume of counselors working for them is huge
Correct.
as compared to a private
Yeah.
entity helpline. So you're more likely to get through to the numbers faster, connected to a counselor faster, etc. So I think if you have just about 6 or 7 numbers with you and you're in a really state of crisis, dial them one after the other, whichever one you get a call on, keep it. And I have curated some of those as well. You have done those. But I made sure to only put those or only curate those that seem to be verified. That means that
Exactly.
really work, that where
Exactly.
people really pick up and talk. And those I think are two. One is entities that were operational before, so they have a system going. And second are the ones released by the government recently, which have volume in terms
Correct.
of number of counselors. So I think those are to look out for. If you're completely lost, I would say that the best thing to do is call your nearest hospital.
Hmm.
They will for sure have a psychiatrist present or a psychologist present, and you can just go and take a visit if they are operating, in person, or at least a video call.
Right.
At least this is an authentic source. You
Hmm.
know that the hospital is not going to appoint anybody without a medical license or a proper certification. Yeah.
Correct.
So hmm,
So now coming to another aspect of, the lockdown, which is there was a lot of things being propagated that, you're not stuck at home, you're safe at home. Look at it that way. But
hmm,
there's a large amount of people who are not safe at home, like for whom their
hmm,
home is not a safe place. It could be because of, past abuse, or it could just be like current abuse, just any toxic family, toxic relationships, which now they're not able to get out of because of the lockdown. How do you think those people can better take care of their well-being?
it's a very difficult place to be in when there is ongoing abuse. And even if the person is taking therapy, it is very difficult to take therapy when the abuser is around. Even if
Correct.
they're getting an isolated room, they
Hmm.
often don't feel mentally also at peace or at calm to connect in the therapy session. So it's a multi-layered issue. Of course, the wisest thing is to get out of that situation. But and I know that's easier said than done. Even before the lockdown was announced, it's very difficult for a person who is living with an abuser to even consider leaving the home, to get out of there. Sometimes it's because their brain doesn't allow them to, sometimes because they're not independent and they can't leave because they have no other source of income or support. So the best thing to do is, of course, leave the place. Physical safety is more important than anything. There are now initiatives and government helplines and government support for this. That said, if you're not able to get out of that situation for a variety of reasons, then at least seek professional help. These days, there is a lot of free counseling available. So we can avail of that as well if you're not able to afford the counseling. So if the person is stuck in a place where they are completely at literally at their end,
Right.
their rope is close to breaking, and they are contemplating suicide, then calling up a helpline and then having to go to a therapist once a week or twice a week, even if it is for 30 minutes, can make a massive difference to at least stability. You're not going to change the situation, but at least the person doesn't feel so emotionally lost.
Right.
That said, uh, abuse, and especially in the home, abuse of any nature in the home is a very multi-layered situation that requires initiative from the legal system, that requires initiative from the government, and of course from mental health providers. It's a very complex scenario, and we really know the true picture emerging maybe once the pandemic dies down. We know how many people have gone through trauma because of being stuck at home with their abuser.
And I think, sometimes we don't realize how common that actually is, even if it's for children who are in abusive homes, or even individuals who might be in abusive homes who might have stayed pre-pandemic, because firstly in India it is hard for people, as you said, to leave, but also that, earlier they had those distractions which we spoke about earlier, like, young people would go out, they would mingle and try not to be at home like as much as they could, but now suddenly, you don't have that option.
Absolutely, there's no way they're getting any support, even if it means a little bit of going out, getting
Yeah.
some source of sanity from outside the home. That's also taken away. So it is very difficult. I've had clients who had to take calls from their basements, terraces, because they just don't feel safe in the home environment.
and
I
that
have had, yeah, that's very, very difficult.
and that's been a big challenge. I mean, for a lot of people who are at home, you can't access the help the way you used to. Like, yes, we have online help available, but we need to realize that access is in two ways. One is like literally having connectivity, but the other is, am I able to? Like, will my environment facilitate for me to feel, safe enough to get on a call and have that conversation with somebody? So
Correct. Absolutely
that is
correct.
something, as you said, we'll only come to know, as a longitudinal study a little later on, that how did this really pan out.
I really hope that sufferers and people who have been at the receiving end of abuse of any form, it doesn't really have to only be physical, but any kind of abuse, talk about their stories and share, so that it gives an idea of how to cope in a situation like this. What did they do? How did they survive? What were the things that helped them? And what would they advise others to do in a similar situation? Because such kind of qualitative analysis, deeper analysis of stories, not just numbers which finally just convert to data, but true stories that give hope. If you're stuck in a situation like this, what do you do? How do you get through it?
Another
Hmm.
concern that people have with COVID and, the lockdown, which I don't think gets addressed enough, is the anxiety around lockdown easing, and
Hmm.
about getting back to things, or, just being able to go out again. A lot of people have either, this, it's just hard to make that transition again for people. So for them, I mean, have you come across these sort of cases, and what could people do, to help them make that transition again?
Yeah, because as you yourself said a little time back, humans thrive on security. They thrive on routine, right?
Yeah.
Many people say they get bored of routine, but but we really humans don't know how much importance we place to routine of some kind or the other. And now, prior to the first wave, the routine we had got upended and a new routine started. And now that will be upended, and we probably may have to go back to real life. Even if that doesn't happen now, it'll happen at some point. How are people going to be okay with jumping back into the kind of life they led before? A lot of people that speak to me say they do not want to go back to that life. It was a crazy life. They were traveling three hours a day. They were
Mm.
traveling like crazy out of the city to do work. They had absolutely no concept of home work life balance. They did not know what exercising meant because they never had time for it, right? A lot of people don't want to go back to that crazy life that we led, where we were just, I think, led by dopamine in our brain, and no one wants to go back to that. Some do. Some people thrive on that and prefer that, but that number is shrinking. That I think
Yeah.
that last June there were a lot more of that, but this June I think, even the dopamine seekers are now not wanting to jump back to that kind of crazy routine that they had earlier. So I would say that even employers and organizations need to start getting sensitive that everybody is not going to be ready to go back to the way things were earlier. They have gotten used to video calls. They have gotten used to, wearing certain clothes and sitting for meetings now. Many companies have, because of the screen fatigue, have asked people to turn off cameras and talk so that, they don't go through that stress. And that's not an added stress. I mean, to suddenly go back to the real world is not going to be easy. So I think employers and organizations have to account for that. It's also important for families to account for the sudden separation anxiety they're going to have after bonding and staying together and establishing a routine. Suddenly, if two members of the family have to leave the home and go away, what impact it has on the children, especially small, very small children like toddlers. So the breakup of that system, I'd say just approach things very slowly and mindfully, and be prepared that if you're getting back to regular life and the so-called new normal, I don't even know what that is anymore because this just seems normal now, is going to come with its set of depression. You're going to feel sad, irritated, not wanting to concentrate, wanting to run back home. That's going to be the case for some time. It's important to be aware about that, and it's important to talk about it. However, it's temporary. After some time, the brain will align. It will be able to balance and come back to some kind of a routine. But the good habits that we learned in the pandemic, which many of us have learned, whether it is uh, you know self-care or it is family values, those shouldn't be forgotten. Some way in which we can blend the gifts that the pandemic has given with our going back to routine life have to be blended together. And if all goes well and we approach it mindfully, I think we can come out of it thriving.
Right.
Yeah.
See, you mentioned about the gifts from the pandemic, you mentioned about our learnings, you mentioned about the new normal. So, from a mental health perspective, Havovi, what are some things you would like to see, in that new normal?
I would like to see things which we didn't see in the old normal. Let's call it
Right.
that. Old normal. I think we didn't see self care. We didn't see work life balance. In the Microsoft Work Trend Index report, which was released last year, September 20. So Indian employers and Indian employees were the ones who really were not taking care of their mental health. And that should change. I hope in the last year that has changed. So when the Microsoft Work Trend Index 2021 comes in, I hope it brings with it a better understanding of how Indians may have evolved over the last 1 year. So definitely taking care of themselves, learning how to draw boundaries between work and home, learning how to be able to have a closer bonding with their family. I hope all this continues even in the new normal, and deeper conversations,
Right.
that are rich in emotional understanding of one another and validation of one another. I hope that continues because that we don't have time for in our so-called busy rush lives. Uh, and one more thing which I think is important uh, from the point of view of what the pandemic has taught us is to start shaving off those unnecessary things in our life which didn't add any value, only added stress, whether that was trying to prove to other people, that we are better than them by competing unnecessarily or unhealthily, over socializing, overdoing things like, learning and cutthroat competition at the workplace. So I think a lot of these things have been eased off with the pandemic. They may come back because we are humans, but maybe we have a better understanding of how to manage it. And we know now that when those things didn't exist, the toxicity at workplaces that probably are not there because people are not meeting face to face, what does life look like when that toxicity is not there? If their brains have an idea of what that looks like, they may not want to go back to it. So I see probably there'll be a decrease in office gossip, more inclusivity of mental health issues, more kindness, more compassion, the true positivity that we should have to thrive in this world.
I think, that's really beautifully the way you sort of summed, all the things that we could hope to see. And it's sad that we don't have it right now, but we can, still be hopeful that, we will use our learnings, experiences, and come to that.
I
And
hope we do because I, I think the pandemic has changed our brain in a lot of ways. And the learnings always we carry forward. So I hope we carry the good learnings forward.
we can all hope, right? Like,
Yes. Hope makes the world go round.
absolutely. So my last question to you today is going to be that, Howie, for anybody who's watching this right now, who might be having a hard time with their mental health, what would be your parting words for them?
It's something which I also fall back on when I feel like I've reached the end of my rope and there's no hope for so many things in my life. I always tell myself that humans are bigger than their problems. And human strength is very underrated, it's underestimated. So every brain wants to heal, every brain wants to feel better. So even if you're at your lowest low, remember that you will find something, even if you're in your darkest and darkest of days, you'll find something in your head that tells you reach out to this person, or say this to yourself, or look back at that quote, it may have helped you, or do this, it'll help you. Whether that thing is walking 5 minutes or going and eating something in the kitchen that will help you feel better. Our brains want to heal. They never want to give up, curl up, and just die. And if your brain is constantly telling you that dying is the only option, that's because it has really thought that there is no other option apart from dying. And it takes 5 minutes sometimes of a conversation with a validating individual to make you change your mind. That there are choices, there are options. The reason people think about suicide is because their brain tells them there is no other option, given the problems that that person has in their life. And sometimes there are lots of choices. The brain can't see it, but someone can help them see it. So trust your brain first. It really wants to heal. And if your brain is giving up on you, then try to trust someone, even a stranger, at a helpline. But reach out. Those would be my words. And remember, really, I would say that the strength of the human is far bigger than any problem.
I think, that's been very, very insightful, and it's been a very informative session. So thank you, Hovi, for taking our time, for joining us, for sharing a whole range of perspectives with our audience, around COVID and mental health. And I'm sure people will draw that hope and inspiration from the things that we've, shared today in this conversation. And I'd just say that, lastly, for anyone who is watching this today or listening to this episode, please know that, if you're having a hard time, even as Havovi said, there is always help available out there. And no matter what stage you are at, you deserve to feel better, you deserve to heal. So just give yourself that chance. And, we're always here to hear, and things will get better. So thank you so much for joining us. And till the next time, we hope you stay well and stay healthy. Thank you.